Tag TV and Tag Radio be seen and heard by both technology users and technology producers throughout the state of Georgia and around the world. Low cost, big benefits, powerhouse online branded video and audio has arrived. Tag TV, Tag Radio, there's a lot more to know. This edition of Tech Talk is brought to you by GlobalSpeak.com, new media consultants, corporate video and audio communications, video and audio production and distribution, live and virtual event production. Tag TV and Tag Radio is a service of GlobalSpeak.com, creatively delivering powerful marketing, video, and audio solutions. Remember when your mama told you to turn off the lights as you leave the room? Or that 2001 Space Odyssey science fiction movie when Hal handles everything from warp speed to food service? Well, think of it as Mom and Hal are rapidly becoming Mayberry meets Star Trek, and now it's called the Smart Grid, an energy internet that integrates information technologies with current electrical infrastructure. It'll reduce waste, integrate wind, solar, and other renewable energy solutions, minimize impact of outages, manage use based on variable pricing, and even enable electric vehicles. Sorry, lunch is still optional. Greetings, everyone. It's Tuesday, September 28th, 2010, and this is Tech Talk with Technology Association of Georgia President Tino Mandela. Just what is the smart grid, and what can it do for the environment, society, and, oh yeah, you and me? First, mark your calendars for Wednesday, October 13th. You will not want to miss this one. It's a special conference held at IBM Hillside presented by the TAG Smart Grid Society and MIT Enterprise Forum, bringing intelligence to the electric grid. You'll learn how the smart grid ecosystem is forming, how it's advancing innovation and accelerating economic development. But first, it's next up to the Tech Talk as Tino speaks with Jonathan Goldman, co-founder of the MIT Forum here in Atlanta, where he has served as chairman of his executive committee and currently serves as the Atlanta chapter board chair. As the vice president of engineering at HydroPhi Technologies, Jonathan is also a partner at Platform Technology Ventures and co-founder, president, and CEO of Physodyne. Prior to this, he was a director of business development at Suniva, the rapidly expanding solar cell manufacturer headquartered here in Atlanta. Jonathan was key in helping the company spin out of the Georgia Tech in 2007. From his first days as a NASA space shuttle engineer for Rockwell International to his instrumental direction of 5 startups and nearly 6 years as an associate director of Tech's Venture Lab, Jonathan has been a thought leader, management guru for more than 20 years in the local entrepreneurial community. How entrepreneurial companies are driving technology and business to transformation of the electric grid. Get smart as Tino Tech Talks with a truly one-of-a-kind visionary, entrepreneur, investor, and executive leader, Jonathan Goldman.
Jonathan, thank you for joining me on Tech Talk today.
Thanks. It's a pleasure to be on your show today.
It's always a pleasure to partner with our friends at MIT Enterprise Forum, and we're looking forward to a big event on October 13th. The category is Smart Grid, and just to surmise that some of our listeners may not know what Smart Grid is, maybe you can start there. What are the keys to unlocking the future of Smart Grid? But even before that, maybe a little bit on Smart Grid.
Sure. So the smart grid is talked about and referred to very often as what we're going to move to, and it's not going to happen overnight. It's going to take many, many years, but there's an opportunity there because it means lots of new jobs and lots of new technologies. And I guess to begin to answer the question, let's take you back to, if you remember what happened on August 14th of 2003, up in the Northeast where there was this big outage, this big power outage.
Right.
There were actually 10 million people in Ontario and 45 million in 8 states in the northeastern U.S. that were taken offline. And there were several reasons that were cited in the minutes and hours afterward. There was actually a lot of finger-pointing going on. Some people thought it had something to do with the New York ISO. It's called the ISO, the Independent Service Organization that runs the power grid. Some people thought it might have been a reversal in the power flow in this big loop that runs around Lake Erie. Finally, they think they traced it to somewhere in Ohio. So it wasn't clear at the time what happened, but obviously there was this cascading effect that brought down a large segment of the grid. And Bill Richardson, if you remember, who at one point ran for president, who was in charge of the Department of Energy at the time, he said that the U.S. at the time, the U.S. is a global superpower with a third world electric grid. Now that's a little bit of an overstatement because our power is pretty clean from the point of view of being reliable, but for that to have happened, if you can imagine, in the 21st century, it was just inexcusable. And part of the reason has to do with technology, but also it has to do with some market incentives and the deregulation that was put in place several years ago that really didn't favor a continued investment in the transmission lines. Deregulation had separated the generation side from the distribution side, and so because of that sort of balkanization of responsibility, we're getting to a point where the grid is a little bit more vulnerable, and so the smart grid really has to do with moving from this older style, which is sort of a top-down topology, to more of an internet-like topology. So if I think about how we get there and what are the keys, the first one is to think about it as more like an internet where instead of just things flowing from high voltage, down the line to lower voltages, that it needs to be more like routers on the internet where the best path is being found and there's kind of a redundant mesh network so that it's just more robust and resilient, and it's less prone to these kinds of failures. Now, another thing that we see happening is a move toward what I'll call microgeneration. So, today you've got the power plants providing base load generation, and that's fine for an average day, but then and actually it's kind of overkill in the evening, right? We've built all this capacity for electricity, and during the day when everybody's at their job, and then things are strained. But at night when most people are sleeping, then you kind of have more than enough there. And then during the summer, that's when there's really a big strain. So microgeneration is the ability to have folks generate their own power during the time of these peaks. So if it's an on-site solar system, some solar panels on your roof, or maybe an old-fashioned generator, then people can kind of level out those variations or do what's called peak shaving so that they can kind of take the load or shed the load a little bit from the grid so that it isn't always super strained, let's say, in the middle of the day in the middle of the summer. So even though a power plant is more efficient, sometimes it's actually cheaper to run a relatively inefficient diesel generator, because if you look at some place like California, where they have something we're not used to here, they have time of day pricing. In the middle of the day, in the middle of the summer, people might pay 31 cents out there, even 35 cents a kilowatt hour. And when the prices get to be that high, even though those big giant turbines at the power plant are way more efficient, it can actually it can be cheaper to run your own generator. And so this micro-generation phenomenon, I think you're going to see a lot more of that. And that leads to what's called grid islanding. There are these little islands within the grid of generation, people either taking care of themselves or either they overbuild a little bit and take care of their neighbors, businesses, right? And that's going to be a move people make to try to avoid this time of day pricing penalty. So that's kind of the second key that I see. Then the third is maybe the one that most people have heard about, and that's smart metering. Smart metering is a tool to help you analyze the usage and advise on cost mitigation and let you control alternative sources. So this is happening today at both the residential level and at the commercial level. We see this happening with new devices and new technologies to let you take advantage and be smarter about how you use energy. For example, in the residential example, it's kind of a pain to to manage your air conditioning and heating setbacks, as they call them, right? It's when your unit kicks on and kicks off and at what temperature. And for most people, they may have to change that twice a year, when the seasons change. But what if it was smart enough to change in response to the weather, so that if it's a super cold morning, the heating comes on, just a little bit earlier before you wake up, so that things are comfortable when you wake up. Or if it's going to be extra mild, then let's take the foot off the brake and not have the air conditioning run so much. That's the kind of intelligence that we're talking about in smart metering. Now let's take the commercial example. So let's say you have a business that does cell phone billing and you use lots of servers in a data center, and you know that 1/30th of your customer base is going to get billed every day of the month, right? Everybody comes on and has a new billing cycle, when their bill comes due, so probably 1/30th of your customers are getting billed, and these could be tens of thousands of customers. So when do you actually kick off those servers that pull all the data out of the database and print all the bills? And do you do it at 8 a.m. in the morning? Should you do it at 4 a.m. at night? How long is it going to take? So that's, again, where a smart meter can help the enterprise make smart decisions.
I know the stimulus package dollars have been utilized for that purpose, to put in meters. I think millions of dollars is being spent now on that. Is that correct? That's
right. It's in the stimulus bill, and I think the point is that even with those dollars there, I think the technology is just beginning to make its way into the market in very interesting and robust ways for both the user, the residential user, and business as well. And then the fourth innovation I call smart storage. So what if you could have your own storage system at home? Remember I said there are these peaks and valleys during the day, and when it's in the middle of the day, in the middle of the summer, and it's super hot, what if you had a bank of batteries in your basement, and overnight you tank them up so that if you had an extra hot day, you could draw on the batteries during the day and take use of that time shifting, right? My power is cheaper at night, so I'm going to suck some power in at night when it's cheaper and then use it during the day when otherwise it would be more expensive. Or if you have a solar system and the smart meter goes out to weather.com and says, hey, it's going to be cloudy for 5 days in a row. Let's go tank up these batteries to take you through, because your solar panel is not going to take you through those days. So I think smart storage is something that people are going to see in the next 5 years, where they can marry it up to either their own grid, where they're still plugged into the grid, or marry it up to a set of solar panels. And then the last thing is what I'll call large-scale solar, where you get to have cheap, large-scale storage that's going to actually interface with things like solar and wind, large solar and wind power plants that are actually deployed out in the grid to serve as buffers.
So we have the event coming up on the 13th, and I'm sure we'll learn more about what it's going to take to get us there, because you talk about a long runway here. This is something that's just starting out, but certainly the name has picked up momentum, and there's investment being made. And but talk a little bit about what it will take us to get there.
Well, I think it's going to be a combination of things. First, technology is clearly a key, and our keynote speaker from A123, remember that's the Boston startup that's using some MIT technology around lithium-ion batteries. They're probably best known for applications in automotive, where they've taken these batteries and scaled it up for electric vehicles, but they also have a group that makes grid-scale battery products. And this is basically a bunch of lithium-ion batteries that are stuffed into a truck trailer, and it's being used by utilities and business today to do just what I mentioned before, that kind of TiVo-like time shifting, where people can use the batteries during the day when the power is more expensive. So technology is clearly a key. Also, there needs to be some innovations on the regulatory side and the policy side that favor the investment in more transmission and distribution infrastructure that, for example, that moves the solar power from the west and the desert southwest when they have these very large arrays in the field, or that moves the wind from the upper Midwest over to the power-hungry northeast and southeast. Now, there's some sensitive right-of-way issues because people are very much, not in my backyard, and they see this notion of these big power lines coming through their states, like the Midwestern states, and so there's going to be some horse trading there to get around these right-of-way issues. But clearly, the policy side is one place that can really help us move forward. If you take, for example, a country like Germany, there are only 80 million people, but they consume today half of the world's solar output. And that's because 10 years ago, they put policies in place that made everybody who buys a solar system kind of their own entrepreneur, where they could sell the excess back to the grid. Actually, all of it. They sell everything they make back to the grid, and they get a premium for it. It was very expensive for the German government, but it made Germany number one consumer and number one in solar technology. And so I think regulation and policies are very important. They're costly investments. On the other hand, it does represent potential lot of clean tech jobs. So the other place is in what's called renewable portfolio standards. So an RPS is a regulation that's currently, it's at the state level. There is no federal RPS yet that says we as a particular state are trying to get to a particular percentage of our power being generated from renewables. And when you do that, when you push the system that way, it means you've got to push the grid to be able to handle these new and renewable sources. So I think it's all of that. It's the transmission lines and it's the policy that will enable those investments to be made.
So over time, lower risk, lower cost, lower carbon footprint, I guess. And what else is, why should business and residential customers be excited about this or be aware of it?
Well, look, all of these innovations are saying that we should finally be able to, to use the, I guess, healthcare metaphors that bend the cost curve on energy. Nobody's willing to stand up and say, my cost for power is going to go down. They're going to suddenly find a lot more oil or a lot more coal, so much more that it's going to push the cost down. Everybody agrees, all the experts agree that coal and oil are going to slowly march up over time. And so what do you do about that? You've got to find ways to mitigate that, because if you're a manufacturer, then energy cost is important. But even if you're if you're a service business and you use lots and lots of servers, electricity is a big deal for you. So we need this because it provides those jobs and it provides that opportunity to bend the cost curve over time. It's not going to be immediate, and we might end up paying a little bit more today, but over time it's going to allow us to have a lower cost.
Well, Jonathan, thank you for joining me on Tech Talk. For those of you that want to learn more about smart grid, MIT Enterprise Forum and TAG have a major event, call it a summit, coming up on October 13th. The theme is bringing in intelligence to the electric grid, and it's actually going to be a worldwide live webcast as well. You can sign up by going to tagonline.org, or you can sign up by going through the MIT Enterprise Forum website. And Jonathan, thank you for joining me on Tech Talk today.
Thanks, gentlemen. I enjoyed it.